Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class we will learn Tosfos Divrei Maschil V'Shogeg Leikon Sua. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we can see what Tosfos is coming to explain. We said over here V'Shogeg Leikon Sua. The Gemara previously presented two brises referring to a case where an individual lifted up an item in Rosh Hashanah, extended his hand outside into Rosh Hashanah. One brise said Asur L'Achziro, and the other brise said Mutar L'Achziro. So originally we wanted to say Asur L'Achziro because the hand is considered a karmelis. That brise holds we give the person a knas. The brise that says Mutar L'Achziro holds that we don't give the knas of a karmelis, he can bring his hand in. The more they wanted to say that there's actually a variety of ways of interpreting these two brises. We're not limited to that explanation. The first answer was, we'll see why this is needed in the structure of Tosfos. The first answer was that they actually both hold it is a karmelis. And the one that says Asur, because it's under 10 tefachim, it's a karmelis, he can't bring his hand back in. The one that says Mutar, it's because it's above 10 tefachim, which is a makam ptur, so he can bring his hand back in. Then we said it's possible to explain that they actually both hold it's not a karmelis. The one that says that it's Asur, he can't bring his hand back in, it's a case where he extended his hand outside on Shabbos. So we imposed the knas that he can't bring his hand back in. The one that said Mutar extended his hand out before Shabbos, therefore since he didn't do an Isser, we didn't impose the knas, we allowed him to bring his hand back in. When we presented that answer, the Gemara said from this we could learn out that we could resolve the question that Rav Bibi Bar Abaya had. Rav Bibi Bar Abaya had a question: if an individual placed dough in an oven on Shabbos by mistake, we'll see later it could also be on purpose. But let's now look at by mistake. It'll come up later in Tosfos and in the Gemara. If he put it in by mistake, and then after a moment he realized his mistake, and now he wants to remove the bread. He didn't yet do a Isser Chatos. It wasn't baked yet. He wants to remove it before it bakes. So Rabbi Barbai asked, do we permit him to remove it or not? The question is, since there's an Isser to remove bread from an oven on Shabbos, so did the Rabbanan permit him to remove the bread? They remove their Isser, which is that a person can't take out the bread. Did they permit him to do that in order that he shouldn't come to a Chiyuv Chatas or not? We see from here that the Rabbanan would not permit him. How do we see it? Because we said if the person extended his hand out on Shabbos, we don't worry ourselves. And we say he can't bring his hand back in, even though he'll certainly come to dropping it. There's no way he's going to hold it a whole Shabbos. So we see that we put an Isser Midrabanan, even though it'll lead to an Isser Torah, an Isser Chatas. He ends up doing Hitzah. He lifted it up, extended it out, and now he's going to put it down. It's the same thing there. We're going to leave the Isser and we won't let him remove it. The Gemara they wanted to say, I could give you another way of learning the brises so that you won't resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya. And the other way of learning the brises, that's what our Tosfos is going to focus on, that part of the Gemara, is that the two cases are as follows. The Brisa says we don't permit him to bring his hand back in is referring to a case where he extended his hand out on purpose. Since he did it on purpose, we don't allow him to bring his hand back in. The one that says Mutar L'Achziro is referring to a case where he extended his hand out by mistake, therefore we permit him to bring his hand back in. So that was the answer the Gemara gave. So the Gemara said that we cannot resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. You can say that the difference between the two Brises, one said Asur L'Achziro is b'mezid, the one that said Mutar L'Achziro is b'shogeg. So there's going to be two parts of Tosfos. Number one is Tosfos will explain that the Shogeg case must be referring to that it was before Shabbos arrived. We'll see this all in Tosfos. And the second point in Tosfos is he'll explain from the Mezid case. Basically what Tosfos is going to address, just to give a general overview now, is that why can't we now resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya? So this is quite a difficult Tosfos. There's a lot of different interpretations. You have a Marsha, a Marshal. We're going to stick to the explanation of the Marshal, and we'll go through it. So basically, just to set out the task of the Tosfos, we'll explain why can't we resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya from the din of b'shogeg that we permit him to bring his hand back in, and why can't we resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya from the din b'mezid that we don't permit him to bring his hand back in. So let's see. Go through the Tosfos now in the flowchart. So we gave this explanation to the two brises. The brise that said Asur L'Achziro is that he extended his hand out by mezid, so we don't permit him to bring it back in. When they said Mutar L'Achziro is referring to a case that he did a b'shogeg, so we allow him to bring the item back in. There's a question that's going on over here. What happened over here, b'shogeg? B'shogeg, the individual lifted up the item, he took it outside, and now the question is, do we permit him to bring it back in or not? And we're saying that we do. So we could learn from here that by Rav Bibi Bar Abaya, the person put it in b'shogeg. Are we going to allow him to take it out or not? Yes, we do. Just like over here, we say we're going to allow you to bring it back in. We're not going to create a problem which could lead to Isser Chatas. So too by Rav Bibi Bar Abaya, the same exact thing. We'll allow him to take out the bread, so he shouldn't come to a Chiyuv Chatas. Now, Rashi gives his answer, and we'll see that afterwards. Now we're going to focus on Tosfos. Tosfos holds that the two cases are exactly similar. The fact is, in both instances, there could be an isser that holds back the person, really forces the person to come to a chiyuv chatas. And in this case, what do we say? We're not going to put the isser of the rabbanon. We're going to allow him to avoid the chiyuv chatas, the isser chatas. So the same thing by Rav Bibi, just like by the individual, we allow him to bring his hand back in, not to come to isser chatas. So to Rav Bibi, we'll allow him to take out the bread, so he shouldn't come to isser chatas. That's what Tosfos is going to address now. So just read the bubble for a moment. We see that by Shegig we remove the Isser of the Rabbanon that would have led to an Isser Torah, so we can resolve the question of Rav Bibi. So Tosfos explains is a case where he extended out his hand before Shabbos. So we cannot resolve the question of Rav Bibi. In other words, let's just complete that. From the Shegig case, Tosfos says it seems we can resolve the question of Rav Bibi. And that reason is because the individual extended his hand outwards, and now we have an opportunity of putting an Isser in place that he can't bring it in, but that will lead to an Isser. And we say, an Isser Torah, an Isser Chatas. So we say, no, we're not going to put an Isser D'Rabbanan that will lead to Isser Chatas. We're going to remove the Isser D'Rabbanan, and that way he could avoid the Isser Chatas. So say the same thing by Rav Bibi. Tosfos therefore answers that when we say that we're allowing him to bring his hand back in, it's referring specifically when he extended it out before Shabbos. If he extended his hand out before Shabbos, then we're not going to give him any Isser. It's not going to lead to Isser Chatas anyway. We're not going to give an Isser because it was done before Shabbos. It wasn't so extreme. What would happen if he extended his hand out on Shabbos? It's possible that we won't put the Isser there, so it shouldn't lead to Isser Chatas. It's possible that we will put the Isser there because he did it on Shabbos. We have no information regarding that case because the explanation that we're presenting now in the Gemara is B'Shegig before Shabbos. So that's how Tosfos explains how the case of B'Shegig we cannot resolve the question of Rav Bibi. Now let's move on to the Mazid. Tosfos asks, why don't we resolve the question of Rav Bibi from our first answer from the case of Mazid? We're going to focus now on the case of Mazid. This is based on the explanation of the Maharsha. From the Mazid case, we could also resolve the question of Rav Bibi. How is it? And we'll get to the second part in a moment. The case of Mazid is the person picked up the item, he extended his hand outwards, and now we're going to tell him he can't bring it back, even though it'll lead to an Isser Skilo. So let's resolve the question of Rav Bibi in a case where the person did it b'Mazid. The person went ahead and put dough in the oven on purpose. And then after a few moments, he regretted it. He wants to remove it. He doesn't want to do this Isser Torah. He doesn't want to do the Avera. Do we permit him to remove it? Do we take away the Isser of removing bread from an oven on Shabbos, or do we keep it in place even though it leads to a Isser Chatas? We could resolve it from the case of B'Mazid. B'Mazid we said we're going to put the Isser in place even though it leads to Isser Chatas. So to Isser Skila, So to Rav Bibi, we'll leave the Isser in place even though it leads to an Isser Skila. Now what Tosfos says over here about the Matam Asar Tvachim, he's saying that we could also learn out from the first answer. The first answer was that if an individual extended his hand out under 10 Tvachim, we don't permit him to bring it back. But it's going to lead to an Isser Skila if it was b'Mazid. So why can't we resolve the question of Rav Bibi in a case of Mazid from this din? And Tosfos holds up this question by saying, you're going to try to answer me that, it's only before Shabbos. It's referring to if before Shabbos he extended his hand outwards, then we don't permit it to bring it back in. Because even if he leaves it out, he won't come to Isser Skila since he began the Malacha before Shabbos. There's no Isser Skila if he puts it down. So maybe when he says you can't bring, when we explained that the Brisa said you can't bring your hand back in, it's specifically if it was extended before Shabbos. But on Shabbos, we don't know. Maybe we will keep the Isser in place. Maybe we won't. We have no information about that. So we can't resolve the question of Rav Bibi. Says Tosfos, no. We already said earlier that if you put an Isser in place when a person does something before Shabbos b'Mazid, you certainly need to put it in place if he does it on Shabbos b'Mazid. Person before Shabbos extends his hand outwards, we're going to give him a knas for putting his hand out. But if he did it on Shabbos, we won't give him a knas. It doesn't make any sense. So obviously, like we said, it's nonsensical, it's completely illogical. So obviously the case of Mazid, when he extended his hand outwards and we keep the Isser in place, will apply before Shabbos and on Shabbos. That means we're going to leave an Isser in place even though it leads to an Isser Skila. We'll leave an Isser D'Rabbanan in place even though it leads to an Isser Skila, which is an Isser Torah. So say the same thing by Rav Bibi. If a person put the bread in on purpose, we'll leave the Isser D'Rabbanan in place that he can't take out the bread from the oven, even though it'll lead to an Isser Skila. And Tosfos answers, again it's a little bit of a difficult answer to understand. He says, no, you can't resolve the question of Rav Bibi. And the reason is, let's do it quickly, that we can say that really they only did it, they only made the Isser before Shabbos. But we said that if you do it before Shabbos, you have to do it on Shabbos also. So they'll also make the Isser, they'll also put the Isser in place on Shabbos. But it's not that this explanation holds that there should be an Isser in place if a person extends the hand out on Shabbos. The answer is based on that if you extend it out before Shabbos, they're going to put the Isser in place. Now, once we do it before Shabbos, we're compelled to also give the person a knas if he did it on Shabbos, because it would be totally nonsensical to give a knas to the person who did it before Shabbos, not the one on Shabbos. So therefore, we'll give him a knas as well. But otherwise, if we weren't forced to, maybe we wouldn't. And therefore, by Rav Bibi's case, where we're not forced by any outside factor to give him a knas, can't determine what the din would be. Maybe they'll permit him to remove it, maybe they won't. So to summarize the Tosfos, we have the case of B'Shegig when we said there was no knas, and we have the case of B'Mezid we said that he can bring his hand back in. We have the case of B'Mezid where there is a knas and he can't bring his hand back in. Tosfos explains why from both of them, at this point in the Gemara, we cannot resolve the question of Rav Bibi. And the reason is, the B'Shegig case that we allow him to bring his hand back in, we can't say, oh, so we allow him to take out the bread to avoid the Isser Chatas, because we'll establish that it's referring to a case that he extended his hand up B'Shegig before Shabbos. There's no question over here of an Isser Torah. And regarding what would we do on Shabbos, we can't determine. Maybe on Shabbos we would give him a knas, because it's more severe. We did it on Shabbos. Maybe we wouldn't, because we don't want the Issa to develop. We have no information about that based on this explanation that we presented, that B'Shegig there's no knas. In the case of B'Mezid, it would seem, look, we put a knas, even though it's going to lead, this Issa D'Rabbanan will lead to an Isser D'Oraisa, an Isser Skila. So also in the case of Rav Bibi, if the person put it on purpose, we'll leave the Issa D'Rabbanan in place, even though it leads to an Isser D'Oraisa of an Isser Skila. Says Tosfos, we can't determine that either, because we could explain that by the case that B'Mezid, when they gave him a knas, it's based on the fact that we gave him a knas for doing it before Shabbos. That's really the only time we wanted to give him a knas. On Shabbos itself, not necessarily. It's just that why was the knas also extend to on Shabbos itself? Because we can give a knas for an individual who did something before Shabbos, and not an individual did it on Shabbos. So therefore we give it to that person as well. But on its own merits, if it's standing on its own merits, a case where a person didn't start an Isser D'Oraisa on Shabbos, and there's Isser D'Rabbanan in place, do we remove it or not? We have no information about that. And we'll do a second class over here that'll explain the bigger picture with Rashi and Tosfos, the arguments that are playing themselves out over here.